We're talking about reaching the reluctant learner. If you spent more than 5 minutes around kids, you kind of already know a little bit about this topic. You probably already kind of know that reluctance is based on experience. Reluctance is based on your life experiences, what you might be reluctant about certain things, but not other things. For example, I'll kind of give you a spoiler alert right now. There's no such thing as a reluctant learner. Why? Because that same kid that might be reluctant or appear unmotivated to participate in a reading lesson will put a lot of effort into learning the new video games. So they're not necessarily reluctant to learn in general, they're reluctant under certain circumstances, and we'll talk about what those certain circumstances might be. Like I said, if you spent more than 5 minutes around kids, you kind of already have a sense of these ideas, but we'll do a bit of a deep dive and we'll talk strategies. In order to do this, it's going to be audience participation time, and we're going to utilize the chat feature. That's why you see the logo right there on the screen. Here's your job. First, no cheating. In just a moment, you're going to see something on the screen, but you can't cheat, meaning you can't look at your phone. If you're on a Mac or an Apple product, don't glance at it other than at the screen. You'll see why that's important here in just a moment. Here is your question. Of the images you see up there on the screen, which is the correct Apple logo? Give it a shot, put that into the chat feature. Which one of those do you think is the correct Apple logo? Well, before I tell you the correct answer, still no cheating, still no looking. Let me tell you the story behind this particular image. Pretty unscientific study, but it was pretty interesting nonetheless. They did this at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. Asked students walking down the middle of campus, imagine a person just standing there with a clipboard saying, hey, do you mind answering questions? That kind of survey, kind of a cold call, people walking down the campus. First question they asked students, do you own or use any Apple products? If they said yes, they said, cool, we have a quick question for you. Now, the audience, or the sample in this case, was Apple product users. In other words, people who ought to know. If you never use Apple products, I can understand that you might not know which is the correct one. You might know that at least one of them is Apple, but you might not know which one. This sample, about 100 students, not terribly scientific, not under rigorous circumstances, but what was interesting is they didn't want to so much find out whether or not students could identify the logo. They were looking at their reactions for when they got it wrong. They wanted to see how people responded when they didn't get what should be obvious. The majority of students, side note, didn't get it right. The answer is B. You can now check. You can look at your phone now and see make sure I'm telling you the truth. The answer is B. So why does this matter? Because there's a difference between knowing and knowing. There's a difference between truly understanding something, between being familiar with something, and just being knowledgeable. We're all familiar with concepts related to motivation and reluctance. What we'll attempt to do in an hour, which is a bit unfair, but we'll give it a shot, we're the gifted group after all, is to go from kind of being familiar with ideas related to reluctance and motivation into more familiar, or from familiarity to knowledge. That's our goal. So let's keep jumping in. Let's take a look. For those of you who like to see some sort of an agenda, here's what we'll look at. We'll give it some good definitions. We'll start connecting the pieces of the puzzle to factors, including experiences. But most importantly, we'll talk about strategies. I'll share with you tons of strategies that work, and I'll describe those as well. All right, audience participation time once again, but this time you don't need to use the chat feature. Just want you to consider this. This is just personal reflection time. Before we start talking about kids, let's make it personal. Imagine this. You're capable of going to the dentist. Let's assume right now that the 15, 20 of us or so in this session, we're capable of going to the dentist, but we choose not to. Want you to consider for just a moment, what are some of the reasons you might not go to the dentist? No need to use the chat feature. Just think about that for a moment. Let's assume you're capable of doing it. You know where a dentist's office is. You have the finances to do it. You have the transportation. You have the time. Let's assume you're capable, but you don't. Why don't you? Consider that question for a moment. Let's see if you came up with any of these ideas. You might not go to the dentist for some of these reasons. I'm curious if you thought of any of those. I'm capable, but here's some of the reasons I don't go. Certainly not an exhaustive list. One of my close friends is Dr. Dennis McKaney. And I shared a joke with him. One of my favorite jokes is, how do you know when it's time to, how do you know what time it is to go to the dentist? You probably know this joke. It's a dad joke. It's really bad. when it's tooth hurty. Get it? 2:30, 2:30. Anyway, I have bad jokes, but still nonetheless kind of fun. There's a lot of reasons we might be capable of doing something, but we choose not to. Often those things are based on our experiences. Now, curious, when you look at a list like this, might any of those reasons also be transferable to why some of your students who are capable of doing a certain level of work choose not to? I think that it's a rhetorical question. I think some of the answers are that we can see some of the same reasons. Some of the reasons are transferable, in other words. It's tremendously frustrating. I was a classroom teacher, elementary school principal, done a lot of roles in the profession. It's tremendously frustrating when you work with a child who's clearly capable of doing good work, but they don't put any effort in. They're clearly capable, but they don't work. It's like, oh, you just want to kind of shake them by the shoulders and say, just try, just turn something in. Could it be that some of the same reasons you might not be thrilled about going to the dentist are some of the same reasons your kids might not be thrilled about completing that report or doing that worksheet? Just something to think about. It's helpful when we look at these things to make it a little personal first. And I mentioned earlier that part of the reason any of us are reluctant is based on our experiences. And it's not fun to take a risk and fail. But this is something that every child needs to understand, that yeah, when you take a risk, there's a likelihood that you're gonna fall flat. There's no such thing as sure taking in life. Well, there are if you never take risks. But children need to understand this, that when we take risks, we open ourselves up, we become a little bit vulnerable. And if we fail at whatever we're taking a risk on, it doesn't feel very good. So no wonder we don't want to do it. So that child that might not want to try to investigate or try to participate in the reading plan or the reading lesson, it might be because they're trying to save themselves some bad feelings. And we'll go about how we can massage and kind of help support that child their way around that. When we're facing a child who seems unmotivated or reluctant to do something, it's good to just remember it's a human emotion to protect yourself. It might not be that they're just a lazy kid who doesn't want to work. Because I think too often we label kids, well, they just don't want to try hard things. Well, you know what? Some of the times I don't want to try hard things either. Because if I try something hard and I fall flat on my face, that feels bad. And I don't want to feel bad. So I can kind of get it. All right, let's continue on. 3 things that every single one of your students really needs to understand. Take a look. This is why relationships are so important, and we'll start with relationships. I'll give you a couple really easy relationship building strategies. Some you might not already be familiar with, some might be a little bit new. If we want our child to step out and take a risk, especially in an academic area where they've struggled in the past, they're going to have to open themselves up and be willing to feel bad. And that's not an easy place for a lot of us. If we're honest, some of us, if we just look in the mirror, we don't take a lot of risks in certain areas of our life, do we? I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a different haircut in probably 30 years. I don't take risks when it comes to my hair. Maybe you're the same way. Some of us, we don't take tremendous risks in our relationships or in the food we eat or any number of areas of life. But if I want to be really good at something, sometimes I have to take risks, and that might mean necessarily that I'm going to fail. But if I fail with people who are supportive and loving and kind along the way, I feel less bad about myself, and I'm much more open to give it a shot. So we're going to talk for the first few minutes about the power of relationships. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir, but if you share this information with anyone else, or you find yourself in a position to share this information with anyone else, here is the evidence about why relationships are so important. We kind of know that relationships matter, but let's look even deeper. The numbers that you see on the bottom are what we call effect sizes. It's just something that a statistician or a researcher uses in order to measure the outcome or power or effect of something. In other words, if you do something, what's the effect or what's the outcome? The higher the number, the better. Here's your job. It's audience participation time, but you don't need to use the chat feature. Just take a guess on this. Which one has a 7.4, which one has a 6.7, and which one has a 6.1? Of the 3 things you see at the bottom, and match the numbers to the actual effects. Give it a shot. Before I tell you the answers, the higher the number, the better. And most researchers suggest that somewhere around a 0.4 to a 0.5 is about a year's worth of growth. So something with the 7-4 effect size should probably tell you we're approaching about a year and a half or so worth of growth when we do this. They go from left to right, top to bottom. Positive teacher-student relationships have a year and a half worth of an effect, a 7-4 effect size. Empathy and warmth, when we show empathy and warmth towards our students, that has a 6-7. And then when we show respectful behavior, that also has a 6-1. But aside from all kind of that technical researchy stuff, we also know that other things come as a result of really good relationships. In fact, relationships can serve as an instructional intervention. Why do we form relationships with kids? Because when we do, they actually achieve at higher levels. Not only are relationships important because it helps you get along, it helps with behavior. Again, I'm preaching to the choir, I know that, but share this with people who might be reluctant to think that relationships really matter. I don't want to stereotype too much, but we often see it at the secondary level where teachers say that it's really more about giving information and sharing content. Well, we have strong effect sizes even at the secondary level. When we have good relationships with kids, good connections, and we show empathy and warmth and positivity, they actually do better academically. Why do I establish relationships with kids? Because I want them to learn stuff. So it's a cause and effect thing there. So we get a lot of really good things. Speaking of relationships, have you ever thought about the difference between right and authority? Let me pause for a moment. Take a look at what you see on the screen about the difference between right and authority. I remember when I first read this quote from this book by Bobby DePorter and her colleagues. It's an oldie but goodie, been around for probably 25 years at this point. Book's been around a long time. I remember reading that and I thought, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. Early on in my educational career as a middle school teacher, I kind of went authority first. I'm the boss. My name's on the door, my diploma's on the wall. You kind of got to do what I tell you to do, because if you don't, I'm going to kick you out of class. Right? You have teachers that have kind of gone authority first. Now, with, I hate saying it this way, but kind of good average kids, it works for them just fine, right? They kind of know schools. You do what the adults tell you to do, and you don't, challenge their authority, and you just kind of comply, and things are all right. But we have far too many of our kids who, if you go authority first, they're going to say, okay, I'm up for a fight, bring it on. Relationships, right, is different than authority. Is I only get the right to teach and interact with someone based on what they're giving me, not just because I have the authority. I have got authority all day long. That's what the school board gives you. What the right is has to be earned. And I never quite thought about it this way until I read that quote in that book, and it had a huge impact on me. In the next few minutes, we're going to talk about just 4 super easy relationship builders, some of which you probably already utilize. I'll give you a little bit of the background, a little bit of the evidence of why this stuff works. And then, like I've said before, feel free to share these ideas and spread the good news. 4 super easy relationship builders. The first one is some variation of I wish my teacher knew. Now, this strategy was popularized by a 3rd grade teacher out of Colorado. It's a woman. I don't know if it's Kylie or Kyle, how she exactly pronounces her name. She was not the first one to create this strategy. She was the first one to popularize it and put it on social media. And then she wrote a little book about it. All she did was this, gave her students 3x5 cards and said, please finish this sentence. What I wish my teacher knew was, or I wish my teacher knew was, something like that. She understood this, and all good teachers know this. Relationships require time and knowledge. This is a knowledge gaining strategy. Relationships, it's more complicated than that, but really just require 2 things. I need to know something about you in order to establish a connection, and I need to spend time with you. This is a way to gain knowledge about people you want to, in this case, students, you want to have a relationship with. Hand your kids a card, or it could be done in a journal. It could be done online, any number of ways. I wish my teacher knew. This case, the student said, I wish my teacher knew I love animals, I do anything for animals, and so forth. If I have a kid that I know this is true of them, that's our bond. Even if I'm not crazy about animals, that is our bond. I wish my teacher knew. A couple more examples. Sad one, this next one's kind of sad. Wish my teacher knew that my family and I live in a shelter. Now, if I knew this about a kid, it allows me to extend grace. If I didn't know this, I might jump to an inappropriate conclusion. For example, let's say it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's right after lunch. This is a typical school example, although it could be true of an online school as well. is it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I didn't know this and I see a kid starting to nod off. If I didn't know that, I would think, okay, the kid isn't interested, they're being lazy, they just don't want to try. But if I knew this about a child who starts to nod off, I might think, ah, I get it. They might not be getting great sleep. If they live in a shelter, maybe they don't get great sleep. I get it. Then I can extend grace, but I have to know this. If I don't know this, I can sometimes jump to inappropriate conclusions. Sometimes what we find out about our kids are pretty sad. I wish Miss King knew that I worried because my mom is getting sick and was in the hospital last night. Different scenario. Let's say this child is in the middle of class. This is probably a traditional classroom example, but it works pretty well. Let's say it's in the middle of class and you're giving a lesson, you're teaching, you're explaining something, and you notice that she gets her phone out and she's doing one of these under the desk. And the rule is you're not supposed to have your phone out. If you didn't know this about this young lady, I'm assuming it's a girl, I actually don't know. If you didn't know this about this child, you might assume she was just willfully breaking the rules and she's just texting her friends. Could it be maybe that if she was checking her phone, she was checking on her mom? It allows me information allows me to extend grace. I wish my teacher knew. Another pretty sad example, my dad died this year. I feel more alone and disconnected. Now, not all of them are sad. Sometimes it's just as simple as I wish my teacher knew I want to go to college. When I do something like this, I'm just trying to gather knowledge about kids. I'm not digging for dirt. I don't tell kids, hey, tell me all your deepest, darkest secrets. Because to tell you the truth, I don't want to know because that's a burden sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes you find out more than you really maybe want to know about a child and what they're struggling with. But when I know, I can establish a connection and extend grace. I usually remind teachers of this. Don't do something like this in the first couple of weeks of school, or maybe certainly the first week. Why is that? Especially with adolescents. Some kids, if they don't know you yet and at least feel safe in your environment, they'll sit back like, why do you want to know? But once they're comfortable in your environment, they know they're safe around you. They're not going to get picked on. You're going to speak politely to them. You're nice, you're pleasant, you're nice to be around. Then they'll start to open up. So this is probably a second week of school activity. And here's a variation of I wish my teacher knew. And it is similar. You hand your students a 3x5 card, a Post-it note, can be done in a journal, and say, I want to be known as. This one's about aspiration. The first one is about condition. What's something about me? This one is about something I aspire to be. Here's an example. I don't know about you, but I want about 100 of those kids in my school. I want about 10 of those kids in every class. Now, I'm not assuming you would do this, but as you share these ideas, something to keep in mind. I would never use this as a hammer, meaning this. If let's say this kid who wrote this was having a bad day, I wouldn't pull them aside and say, you know what, you said you wanted to be viewed as 100% as a leader. You're not being a leader today. That's kind of, that's a little backhanded, I think. But I might use it as a way to have a discussion with the kid. It's like, what needs to happen in our day-to-day so that you can be the leader you want to be? It's a very different way of approaching a kid. This is about aspiration. And here's yet another example. There's tons of examples out there. If I knew a kid wants to be viewed as putting others ahead of themselves, that's a wonderful thing. And just one more example. And it's audience participation time. We're actually gonna do this one together. First, let me model it for you, and then we will utilize the chat feature. In just a moment, you're gonna figure out or think about how you could finish this sentence. Let me give you an example. If you knew me, if you knew Bryan, you'd know there are two things in my life that I have absolutely zero tolerance for. I absolutely hate these two things. I don't use the word hate lightly, but these two things I absolutely hate. Tiny paper clips, like the really, really small ones, like those micro mini paper clips. I don't know why they bother me. I just dislike those things. I throw them away. There are entire landfills in the state of Arizona where I live filled with small paper clips. I know we're all kind of screwed up in our own unique way, aren't we? Here's the second thing you should know. If you knew me, you know I detest pickles. Pickles are disgusting. I hate pickles. I call pickles cucumbers soaked in evil. That's how much I dislike pickles. All right, I'll share with you one more. In just a moment, you're going to put something in the chat feature. You can go shallow or deep, whatever works for you. Here's one more thing. If you knew me, you'd know that it's a 0, not an O. What do I mean by that? When you tell people your phone number, For example, my area code is 520, it's not 520. Why that bothers me when people say it that way, I have no idea. Like I said, we're all screwed up in our own unique ways. But if you knew me, you know it's a 0. You can imagine me driving down the road in the car listening to a to an ad on the radio, and they say it's call 520. It's like, no, it's a 0. It's called a phone number, not a phone letter. Like I said, we're all screwed up. Okay, audience participation time. Put in the chat feature, if we knew you, what might we know? Something like this is just a way to connect with your students. That's it. And they can be done online and in person in a number of different ways. So the first super easy relationship builder is just find something out by having your students do something like, if you knew me, you'd know, or I wish my teacher knew was, because relationships require knowledge. That's the first super easy relationship builder. Here is the second super easy relationship builder, and that is to beware of the word should. No need to use the chat feature this time around, but here's your job. Looking at those 4 sentences, what's wrong with them? What's problematic with the things you see on the screen? Let me pause for a moment, give you time to think about that. So let's see if you said something like this. Well, first of all, let's recognize the pronoun, the personal pronoun you. Here's what part of what we know about you and the use of personal pronouns. When you're praising someone, when you're giving kudos and congratulations and appreciating someone, pronouns are great. Use them liberally. When you're expressing appreciation and I say to you, you are amazing. What you just did blew me away. We are so lucky to have you at our school. That makes you feel good. In those cases, pronouns are wonderful. But if you're in a situation where you have to guide, direct, or redirect someone, pronouns can be a little bit messy. If I go to someone and say, you know what, you really need to correct this, there was a big mistake you made here. Even if I do so in a kind, loving manner, even when we're right, you can put up a block. So pronouns are problematic when you're trying to guide or direct someone because they can sometimes put up a block. The second thing you probably noticed was the word should. Here's your new favorite statement. Feel free to steal it because I stole it from someone else. Your new favorite statement is no longer should on people, or don't should on people. I know I walked real close to the line there. Don't SHOUD on people. Even when I'm right, if I'm working with a child and I'm walking and looking over their work and kind of giving them, and I say something like, you know, you really should have done better on that test. I told you to study. You should know the importance of studying now. You're a 9th grader. Even if I'm right, that kind of puts up a block. Should can be problematic. It's judgmental. It assumes things that you may or may not know. This isn't so much an external strategy like what I wish my teacher knew was, more of just something I need to remember that I don't want to should on people. I don't want to use words that put up a block that could create more reluctance or more block in our relationship. That's strategy number 2. Super easy relationship strategy number 3 is to merely greet students at the door. Now, I know we're in the world of COVID and we're not physically seeing students, but you can greet them in a classroom like this. If you noticed, those of you who came on, I tried to interact and greet with you and call some of you by name. You can do this in a Zoom session as well. There is an interesting study a number of years ago, and other studies have come out with it as well, and just found a nice bump when you greet students at the door. Call them by name, you do a bit of an appreciation, a bit of a recognition, it improves outcomes. That's a pretty cool thing. The image that you see there on the left, that's a teacher. I think he's in the Maryland area, if I remember right. And it's a 4th or a 5th grade classroom. It could even be a 6th grade classroom. He does an individual greeting with each student every day. So he practices for weeks and does some sort of dance or movement or interaction that he and the student decide together, and they practice and interact it every day, every morning. Every kid gets their own individual greeting. When I saw that, I thought to myself, that is a cool dude, and I don't think I could do it. I'm not talented. I can't dance. I don't know that I have that much personality, but what I can do is I can stand at the door, look at a kid and say, hey, it's great to see you. Come on in. Hey, those are new shoes. I like those. Hey, how was the soccer game last night? I can do that stuff. I might not be able to do the cool dances that he can do, but I can do something. When we greet students at the door and just make a personal connection, that matters tremendously in a lot of ways. So that was the super easy relationship number 3. Let's pause and take a look real quick. So let's go on. Let's talk briefly for the last couple of minutes before we talk even more strategies. So the last one is to make positive phone calls home. We talked about the power of effect sizes when parents are involved. We get a nice effect out of that. Now, I'm not going to kill you with research, but I want to share one really interesting study about the power of communication with families and what that does to improve outcomes for kids. Here's the background for this particular study. Took a group of high school kids who are in a credit recovery program. If a kid at the high school level is in a credit recovery program, that tells you that for whatever reason, they weren't terribly successful in a typical high school setting. These are often separate programs, maybe housed at a different location, often self-paced, computer-paced. Kid, for whatever reason, got behind and they have to catch up, credit recovery. They place them into one of three groups as represented by the apples. You see the first group, those children, the parents rather, of those children received a weekly message that was something akin to a report card, a status report. Group number two, as represented by the middle apple, they received a status report plus an improvement message. What that means is they received some sort of message about how they can help their kids improve. Not only this is where your kid is, this is their status, this is what you can do at home to help your kid do even better. And then there was a control group, of course. Now, when you look at the data from the two groups on the left and the middle, all they had in common was a weekly communication. Weekly was the key. We see a really nice bump. Maybe not earth shattering. You might say 2.5%, is that really a big deal? Well, the sample size in this particular sample was big enough that 2.5% actually does make a difference. So that was interesting. And all they had in common was weekly communication. But when you look at the middle group, this is where it gets really exciting. The middle group had a nearly 9% bump. And what they had is the major difference was some sort of communication to the families that said, here's where your kid is, here's how you can help them improve. Turns out when we communicate with families, wonderful things happen. Communicate with families and really nice things happen. And there's a number of different ways we can go about communicating with families to reach our reluctant learners. On the left, you have what I call one way. On the right, you have what we would call two-way strategies. Let me pause for a moment, soak up this list, then I'll differentiate it for you. First, I'm not suggesting that left is bad and right is good. What I'm suggesting is that left is good and necessary, but right changes the universe. When we're working with our families, especially families with kids who are a little bit withheld, a little bit seemingly unmotivated or reluctant, when we ramp up two-way communication, really nice things happen. The things on the left, we can call that one way, meaning it's information from us to them, like a report card, like a robocall, like a website update. It's not really interactive. It's necessary, but all it does is keep families and parents in the loop. Here's what's happening. We change the universe and change the lives of kids when we ramp up the amount of two-way communication, specifically phone calls, and I'll share that with you here in just a moment, the power of a phone call. When we do lots of the things on the right, then it opens up the family to open up to us, the kid, the family, they all come together. Two-way communication is the kicker. Some of you might have noted, Bryan, wait a minute. Personalized notes aren't really two-way communication, but I have them under the high intensity category because if you take the time to handwrite a note to a parent, that's a little bit more meaningful than even the same information in an email. Quick question before we go on. Take a look at this list one more time, both columns, and ask yourself, what is missing? There's something significant missing in both one way and two way. What's not there that you think, why isn't it there? Think about that for just a moment. What's missing from my list? What's missing is email. Why isn't it in the high intensity? Because it is two way, right? Here's why. Here's why email might be okay, but I don't think it's a high intensity strategy, even though it can be two ways. Have you ever misinterpreted or misunderstood the tone of an email that was sent to you? Rhetorical question. Absolutely, you sure have. For example, let's actually even reverse it. Have you ever sent an email to someone that you were thinking, okay, this is kind of urgent, and you put on there, please get back to me as soon as possible. And you even put ASAP in big, bold letters. And then they don't get back to you like for 4 or 5 days. What assumption do you make about the person who doesn't get back to you? Because ASAP to you might be different than ASAP to them. Don't you make some assumptions and misunderstand some? It's too easy to misunderstand subtleties and nuance in an email and a text as well. It's just too easy. What really changes the universe is when we just talk to people. Because when I pick up the phone and talk to someone, some amazing things happen. Some of those amazing things happen is I can develop rapport. I can help understand their perspective. They can help start to understand our perspective. We can establish trust. They can sense the tone of my voice. They can sense how often I ask questions and pause and paraphrase. When I do this stuff, it matters. So here's the super easy way to ramp up two-way communications. And that's just to make positive phone calls home. If you're a note taker, if you're writing notes down anywhere, please write this number down somewhere in your notes. If you have the slides even, right next to this. Here's the number you're going to write down. 5. Write down the number 5. Here is the challenge. And for those of you in leadership and support positions, start sharing this with as many teachers as will listen. All it is this. Every week, make 5 positive phone calls home. That's it. And this is all it sounds like. And model this for your teachers, especially your newer teachers who might be a little apprehensive about calling home. All it is this. Pick up the phone. First, before you do that, identify a kid that you want to say something nice about. It could be a deed, something they did that you appreciate. It could be a character quality, could be the production of some work they did. Think about a kid. Think about what's something really cool I can say about this kid. Then get the phone, dial the number, and it sounds like this. Yeah, hello. Hi, this is Dr. Harris. I'm your daughter's 4th grade teacher. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know how impressed I was with her in class today. She went way out of her way, and then I just explained something that she did. That's it. And then after that, I say, okay, anyway, that's the only reason I called. No reason. Anyway, that's the only reason I called. If you have any questions, give me a call, because I left a message, because most people don't answer their messages anymore. That's it. I invest 20 to 30 seconds, leave a message for a family, because you know when that mom or dad or uncle or grandparent, whoever is raising that kid, when they get that message, you melted their heart. If I actually get a person, most of the time, I'll be honest with you, when I call home, because people don't often answer their phones anymore, it's a voicemail. But let's say I actually get a parent on the other end. This is what it sounds like. Yeah, hi, hello. This is Dr. Harris. I'm your son's band teacher. Anyway, he did something really interesting. This is a proud mama moment. He did something really interesting in class today that I know you're going to be super proud of. So here's what happened. And then I explain what happened. And then after I explain, I say this. So anyway, that's the reason I called. And then I wait for the awkward pause. You know why there's the awkward pause, right? Because they're waiting for the and, the but, the oh yeah. There is no other reason for the phone call other than kind of putting money in the bank, in essence. That's a good analogy. I'm putting lots of money in the bank. When I do this, especially for my most reluctant students, the parent can see that I like the kid, because you know they're going to have that discussion at home. You know that kid's going to walk in your classroom or interact with you the next day a little bit differently. They're going to look at you with almost a unique new perspective. When I say something nice to a parent about their kids, the world changes. And if we had more time, I'd tell you lots and lots of stories. Just suffice it to say this. Those of you who have your own children, your own biological children, your own adoptive children, foster children, whatever, kids that you're responsible for, if someone calls you and gives you a compliment about one of those people, that's the most amazing thing as a parent, isn't it? Nothing will make you feel better than someone complimenting your kid. And it's hard not to like someone who compliments your kid. That's powerful. So the takeaway, the last of the 4 super easy relationship builders, is just to simply make lots of positive phone calls home. Lots of positive phone calls home. And there's even one more reason that we want to do this. It's a little bit of a sneaky side reason, but have you heard of the concept of spontaneous trait transference? Spontaneous trait transference is the idea of this. It's a concept in psychology that says this. When I'm interacting with somebody and I'm expressing a trait about someone else, spontaneously, unconsciously, that trait is brought right back to the person who is expressing it. Example, when I'm talking to mom and saying how much her daughter is patient and kind, as I'm using those descriptions to talk about the daughter, patient and kind, those same descriptions are coming right back on me. The mother doesn't know it's happening. It's this weird, unique human phenomenon when they're taking the trait and putting it back on me. And in other words, it takes a patient and kind person to know someone who's patient and kind, doesn't it? Now, that's not why I do it. I'm not trying to be backhanded with it. But if the mother then walks away thinking good things about me because I'm saying good things about her daughter, that's a win for everyone. By the way, spontaneous trait transference goes both ways. When you find yourself around a person who's constantly negative, even if they're gossiping or being negative about a third party, it goes right back to that person, doesn't it? If you want to know more about that, let me know. We can dig into it. All right, let's pause for just a moment. Here's what we'll do. Since I've been talking a million miles an hour for most of our time, we're going to pause for just a moment and consider this. Of everything I've shared so far, what's the most important point? What have you heard so far regarding relationships, the 4 easy ways to build relationships? What's floating around in your mind? What's kind of there as an important concept? If you'd like to use the chat feature, this would be a great opportunity so we could learn from and with each other. But let's do this. Take a moment, consider of everything we've just talked about, what seems to be the most important idea, most important point. Thank you for processing on that for just a moment. We talked about relationship building strategies. That's excellent. Now let's talk about when kids are with us, whether it's virtual or in person, how can we kind of bring the best out of our most reluctant learners? Here is the first strategy, and it's merely to offer experiences before expectations, experiences before work, experiences first. If I were to put a title on this strategy, it's just called experiences first. And I'll highlight that for you by showing you a short 2-minute video about the power of giving your child or your reluctant kiddo an experience before you expect them to jump into a concept. So obviously that video, let me switch back over. That video was very well produced and professionally produced and all that kind of stuff. And we get that, and that matters. But the real big idea, the big takeaway is simply this: provide your reluctant kids an experience, a science lesson where they get to see something explode. Get them to experience something first, then ask them to dig in and talk about it and kind of go deeper. It's when we're working with students who might be reluctant, offer them some sort of interesting experience, like knocking over one of those little dolls that won't fall down. That's an experience. Then you can talk about something like being resilient. That's the key idea there. So let's use the rest of our time just to talk really doable, easy strategies. This is one that I touched base on, I think, briefly last time we were together, and it's a feedback strategy. How do we go about giving feedback to our most reluctant learners? Here's what we do. Imagine that your student, that reluctant kiddo, took some sort of assessment or did some sort of project or produced something, and you graded it. Maybe it was on a rubric, maybe it was an ABCD scale, whatever it is. You graded it, you provide some feedback. Here's how you might use SEA feedback. You hand the assignment back to the child, and you withhold your judgment. Whether you're proud, disappointed, happy, doesn't matter. Withhold personal judgment as the teacher and engage that child in a series of questions. And you ask them, so let's say they took a test and they got a 67% on the test. Withhold whether or not you think the 67% was good, was adequate, was better than last time, worse than last time. Does not matter. Withhold what you think about 67%. Hand the assessment back to the child and say, just curious, what do you think of the outcome? And then you get even more specific. You say, was that outcome, the 67%, was that as a result of any strategy that you either used or didn't use? Just curious, what do you think? If you didn't already know this about feedback, true feedback is defined as actionable information. Feedback is only feedback when the person who receives the information does something with it. That's why grades are not synonymous with feedback, because most of the time when a student receives a grade on something, they don't do anything with it. They look at it and they go, oh, or they look at it and get excited, but they don't actually do anything with it. In this case, hand that assessment back and ask the child, what do you think? Just curious. Was that 67% a result of a study strategy that you used, that you didn't use? What do you think? Or, and actually these questions kind of all go hand in hand, or was that 67% a result of effort that you put in? A lot of effort, a little effort, no effort, tremendous effort? What do you think? The child is the one who has to think and answer these questions. Or was that result, that 67%, a result of an attitude that you had? Good one, bad one, neutral one? See, as a teacher, first, I withhold my judgment. I might have beliefs and I might actually even be right, but I'm going to withhold it because what I think ultimately doesn't matter. It's how they connect the dots. If you're taking notes, here's what goes in the blank line to the right of the screen. All three of those things, the strategies I use, the effort I put in, and the attitude I have are under my control. They're all under my influence or my control. I can control what ways I study and try to learn something. I can control the effort I put in, and I can control my attitude. That's a life lesson right there, isn't it? Your most reluctant learners, sometimes they've come to the conclusion that the reason I can't do good at math is because we're just not a very smart math family. In fact, you've even seen some of your families and parents say things like, yeah, we ain't good math people. Yeah, it runs in our family. My daddy wasn't good at math either. Okay, maybe there's a genetic component. I don't know. But I want students to understand, every student needs to understand this. Your outcomes are a direct result of what you put in. Certainly there are things outside your control. I'm not downplaying that. Certainly there are things in life that are outside our control, but a lot of life is tremendously under my control, specifically what I learn. So SEA feedback is more something we use and where we just question the kids and get them to tackle the questions. How they attribute those answers matters more than anything else. And we talked earlier about effect sizes. This has a 7-4 effect size. Feedback, which is actually actionable information. The student has to act, not the teacher. The student has to be the one to act. Those are the things that get what we would call a 7-4 effect size. All right, now this next strategy has a whole bunch of, or this next slide has a whole bunch of strategies. Let me pause, soak it up, and then I will highlight a couple of them for you, and then I'll give you an opportunity if you'd like to learn more. Take a look at this list. If you'd like the full page descriptions of these, here's all you have to do is send me an email. These come from either one or both of those books where I describe these. I have a full page written description of in each of these. If you want them, send me an email. Say, Bryan, I'd love the descriptions. I'll send you a PDF of these strategies, my gift to you. So let's talk with the very first one. I love this first one because planted questions, planted answers. I actually first learned about it by following politics, and we're in the middle of a nasty election cycle. So this is perfectly relevant. You could see how this worked. I first learned about this years and years and years ago following presidential elections. Now, we've all seen town halls, right? Where let's say somebody who's running for Senate comes to the community and they bring in 2,000 people and you all sit in a big auditorium. And then people walk up to the podium and they ask the candidate a question. We call them town halls. If you didn't already know this, did you know that most of those questions that come from the audience are planted? Meaning the Senate candidate or the presidential candidate, they already know what questions are coming. They're planted questions. Here's what happens all the time. It's a dirty little secret in politics. It's not 100% of the time, but it happens a lot. You go to one of these town halls and then somebody comes up to you who works for one of the campaigns or one of the organizers, and they say something like, would you like to ask the senator a question? And you think, oh, I sure would. And they say, great, in order to make the best use of our time, let's edit your question. What would you like to ask them? And they help you massage the question into one sentence. By the way, as they're writing and helping you massage your question, guess what they're doing? They're collecting these questions. Beforehand, they take them back to the candidate and they say something like this. At approximately 9:30, there's going to be a gentleman. He's an educator from the state of Arizona. He wants to ask you about school funding. He's wearing a white shirt with a tie. He's got brown and gray hair. Why do they do this? Besides the fact that I love picking on politicians because it's a bit of a sneaky way to do it, why do they do this? There's actually a good reason, a legitimate reason. That Senate candidate, in this case, the example I was using, wants to sound smart. They want to give you a good, coherent answer. And that's really hard to do when there's 40 different topics and 40 different questions. But if I can prepare my answer ahead of time, I can then be more coherent in communicating that answer. So what does that mean for how we might do this in the classroom? All I do is this: pull a child aside ahead of time. This can be done virtually or in person. Pull them aside and say something like this. Say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to do a lesson on cause and effect in the story we just read today. And when I do this lesson, I'm going to start by asking these 3 questions. I wrote them down on a 3x5 card for you. Here you go. I'd like you to consider answering one of those questions. I'm giving them, what am I doing? I'm giving them think time on steroids. I'm giving them like 24 hours of think time. Tomorrow, when I start this lesson, these are the questions I'm going to ask. I want you to consider which one you might like to answer. I'm planting the question way ahead of time to give the child some time to think about it. And then sometimes, you know what I also do? I then sometimes plant the answers as well. Because this is what I do. On the 3x5 card, I said, here are the 3 questions I'm going to ask to start the lesson. By the way, on the back, I wrote out some words you could use when you were answering that question. Just thought you'd like to see it. Why am I planting the answers? Because I'm not assessing knowledge. I'm trying to engage them in the life of the lesson. I'm trying to pull out reluctance. I'm not trying to gauge whether or not they got the right or wrong answer. I'm trying to pull out success. Because when the child sees that, okay, I took a risk, I answered the question, and the world didn't fall apart. Nobody laughed at me. The ceiling didn't come down on my head. Good things happened when I took a risk because I had the support around me. That's a planted question, planted answer. All right, let's see. What can I do next? Let me do one more strategy in, let's see if I can do it in 90 seconds. Oh, I can do closed fist in 90 seconds. Closed fist is a participatory strategy typically used in a face-to-face setting, but could be adapted for online. I pull a reluctant child aside and I say this. I said, most of the time, teachers call on students when they don't know that they're going to be called on, right? So a teacher stands up front and they say something like, Barbara, what is? And often you're like shocked. Oh, okay, I got to answer the question. But I'm going to turn the tables just for you. This is a one-on-one discussion you have with the kid, by the way. Not everybody in the class needs to know this is happening. I pull the child aside and I say, here's what's going to happen. When I start asking questions of the group, you're going to tell me when you want to answer a question instead of me telling you when I want you to answer a question. Let me repeat that in case it was confusing. I say to the child, you're going to tell me when you're ready to answer a question instead of me telling you that I want you to answer a question. And here's how we're going to do it. You're going to use fist to 5. The only people who know this is happening is you, me, and your mom. That's it. Nobody else knows. This is our secret. Okay. Be careful about how you use the word secret around kids. Parents always know what's happening. So does the administration. It's not that kind of secret. When I say secret, I mean not every other kid in the classroom needs to know this is happening. It's between you and that kid. Here's what's going to happen. I start asking questions of the class. You're going to tell me when you're ready to answer a question. For example, if you raise your hand to answer a question and all 5 fingers are up, that means you have full confidence in your answer and I should call on you right away. If you raise your hand and your fist is like this, just your fingers are down, that means you don't have tremendous confidence and I probably shouldn't call on you. But you're raising your hand to volunteer either way. My promise to you is if you raise your hand to volunteer an answer, even if you're the only one and your fingers are down, that's telling me I don't really have tremendous confidence, but I'm trying to participate. So I'm probably not going to call on you. Then you rank it for me. 5 is I'm brilliant. I know this answer, call on me right now. 5 is I'd like to participate like you want me to, but I don't have tremendous confidence. A 2 might mean I'm kind of in the right boat, but you probably shouldn't call on me. 3 might mean I'd be okay if you called on me. I wouldn't freak out. A 4 is even higher confidence. The power of this is all about giving control back to the child. They're going to tell you when they're ready to answer a question. It's all about giving them control and voice. Then sometimes I combine them with other strategies that you'll see there as well.